There are moments in life that brand themselves into your memory so deeply. You wake up years later in the middle of the night, reliving them, sweat on your skin, breath shallow, eyes darting toward a corner of the room as though the memory might have followed you out of the dream. For me, that memory is Bridal Veil Falls. Not the postcard perfect waterfall tourists take selfies in front of on sunny afternoons. No, I'm talking about the trail above it. The one most people don't bother climbing. The one that feels less like a hike and more like a trial. And what waits at the top? Well, that's the part one wish I could forget. But I can't. It began as a family adventure. Though I suppose pilgrimage might be a better word. 14 of us started out together. A small parade of cousins, uncles, aunts, and a few family friends who'd heard about the climb and wanted to be part of something that felt larger than life. The reason was simple enough. At least at first. We were climbing to scatter the ashes of an old family friend. A man named Henry Walker. Henry wasn't blood, but he might as well have been. He'd grown up with my father, Jacob, and my uncle, Daniel. The three of them were inseparable as kids. The kind of boys who got into trouble together and swore oaths on treehouse rafters. Later, life took them in different directions. My dad became a carpenter. Uncle Daniel served in law enforcement. And Henry? Henry lived like his life was a dare. He joined the army, then rode his motorcycle through nearly every state in the country. If there was a mountain worth climbing or a desert worth crossing, he went. And then one night, long before I was born, Henry wrecked his bike on a lonely stretch of highway in Arizona. The crash took his legs, but not his spirit. He lived the rest of his life in a wheelchair. But anyone who met him swore they never saw a man more full of joy. So when Henry died unexpectedly a week before our climb, it hit everyone hard, especially Dad and Uncle Daniel. They had lost their third musketeer. But Henry, being Henry, hadn't left quietly. In his will, he requested that Jacob and Daniel take his ashes to the top of Bridal Veil Falls and scatter them there. Classic Henry, part profound, part inconvenient, part impossible to say no to. Dad had wanted to keep it simple, just him and Uncle Daniel fulfilling their friend's last wish. But if you knew my father, you knew simple wasn't in his vocabulary. He believed everything in life was better as a family event. So he called everyone. That's how a group of 14 ended up at the base of the trail early one Saturday morning, loaded with water bottles, backpacks, and an optimism that would not survive the day. The first stretch wasn't so bad. Dirt path, gradual incline, scattered shade. People joked, passed snacks around, took photos like it was a family picnic. But about a quarter mile in, there was a rest station, and 4 people tapped out right then. They smiled, said they'd wait for us to come back down. But they weren't going any further. That should have been our warning. The trail only grew steeper. By the time we reached the next clearing, 2 more quit. Then 3 more after that. Every time we hit a place to breathe, another branch of our family tree said, "That's it. I'm done," and plopped themselves on a rock to wait. By midday, our 14 had shrunk to 4. Jacob, my dad, Daniel, my uncle, Caroline, my cousin, fresh from her first tour in the army, tough as nails, and me. I thought about quitting more than once, but the sight of my father's hunched shoulders kept me moving. He wasn't a young man anymore. Neither was Uncle Daniel. The 2 of them groaned every time they stood up, sweat soaking through their shirts. I couldn't let them climb alone. Not for Henry. Still, as the sun baked our necks and our thighs screamed, I kept wondering what exactly Henry had been thinking when he wrote this into his will. We were close to the ridge when it happened. Dad was leading, same as always, pushing ahead no matter how much Daniel barked at him to slow down. He placed a foot on a loose stone, and the trail crumbled beneath him. The sound was horrible, the snap of rock giving way, the scrape of dirt sliding downhill. Dad's arms pinwheeled, and then he was gone, dragged toward the edge. Caroline lunged to grab him, but his weight nearly pulled her over too. Uncle Daniel shouted, grabbing for his daughter. His face twisted in panic. By the time I reached them, all three were sliding toward the drop. And that drop was no joke, 200 feet of sheer rock, ending in a mess of jagged boulders. I threw myself down, grabbing Caroline's arm, while Daniel clung to the other. My father's boots scraped against loose gravel, his eyes wide and wild. The smell of sweat and fear filled my nose. And in that moment, something inside me cracked. I thought about every time I'd chosen work over a phone call with him. Every time I'd brushed off his stories because I was too busy. I thought about how my mom would look at me if I went home without him. And all I could whisper, barely audible, was, please. I don't know who I was talking to, God, fate, Henry's ghost. But someone must have been listening. Because suddenly, I felt it. A hand. A strong, unseen hand grabbing the belt at my waist and yanking me backward with a force that wasn't mine. Caroline came with me, and then Dad, until all of us tumbled onto solid ground again. When I spun around, panting, ready to thank whoever had grabbed me, there was no one. Just trees, quiet, and sky. Good Lord, Dad gasped, brushing dirt from his arms. He turned to us, wide-eyed. Is everyone all right? I didn't answer. I just cried, harder than I had in years. And none of us spoke about what had just happened. Not then. Perfect. I'll continue with part 2, the cabin and the ominous signs. This will build the suspense and prepare the ground for the supernatural confrontation later. We didn't talk about what had happened on the ridge. Not out loud. Anyway, each of us carried the memory differently. Dad wore it on his face like a bruise. Uncle Daniel stayed uncharacteristically quiet, and Caroline tightened her jaw as if daring the mountain to try again. I just kept replaying the feeling of that unseen hand yanking me back, the way it had pulled me with a strength I didn't have. I knew what I felt, and I knew it hadn't come from any of them. The trail leveled out for a short stretch, which was a blessing. But it didn't last. Soon we were back to dragging ourselves up another incline. Lungs burning, calves twitching. By the time we broke out of the tree line and onto a rocky ridge, I was half delirious with exhaustion. That's when we saw it, a cabin tucked into a small hollow of the mountain, framed by evergreens and the glow of a setting sun. Caroline squinted. That's it. That's the one Henry mentioned. I remembered then Henry's will had included a note about a cabin near the summit, a kind of hiker's rest stop. Supposedly it had water, food, maybe even a bathroom. It had sounded like a joke at the time. Henry's way of making sure Dad and Uncle Daniel suffered before getting any relief. But now, staring at the little wooden structure, it felt like a miracle. The four of us pushed the door open and stepped inside. It smelled faintly of pine and dust, but the cabin was clean. A row of sleeping mats leaned against one wall. A stove sat in the corner, and a water tank with a pump offered cool, clear relief. The best part, to all of us, was the bathroom tucked in the back. Daniel let out a low whistle. Well, I'll be damned. Henry wasn't lying. Dad ran a hand along the countertop. Electricity, too. Look at that light switches. We're halfway up a mountain, and they've got power. There was no refrigerator, but someone had left instant coffee, a French press, and even tea bags. Dad and Daniel nearly wept with joy when they found them. Soon the two of them were perched on the porch steps, steaming cups in hand, looking as close to content as I'd seen them all day. Caroline and I stuck to water, though she did it with the kind of discipline soldiers carry everywhere. I drank like a man dying of thirst. For a few minutes, life felt normal again. We sat on the porch, sipping our drinks, swapping stories about Henry, Dad laughed about the time Henry tried to jump a creek on his bike and ended up in the water. Daniel shared the memory of Henry getting arrested in Mexico for trying to ride his motorcycle down a set of church steps. Caroline smiled faintly, though she'd barely known Henry, and I pretended to laugh while staring out into the trees. Because that's when I noticed something. The sun had dropped lower than it should have. It wasn't gradual. It was as though time had jumped ahead while we weren't looking. One moment the light was golden. The next it was orange and sliding fast toward red. Getting late, Dad muttered, draining the last of his coffee. We should keep moving if we want to make it to the falls before dark. Caroline stood abruptly, eyes narrowing at the tree line. What? Daniel asked. She shook her head after a moment. Nothing. Thought I heard something. I hadn't heard anything, but the look on her face told me she had. We packed our things and set back on the trail. Caroline took the lead this time, striding ahead with a restless energy that didn't fit the exhaustion in her body. Every so often she'd stop, scanning the trees, her hand brushing against the pocket of her cargo pants. Slow down, Caroline, Daniel called after her. This isn't basic training. She ignored him, disappearing around a bend before reappearing higher up. Dad sighed. She's just like Henry, always rushing headlong into things. I wanted to ask what she thought she'd heard, but the words stuck in my throat. Instead, I focused on the faint roar ahead, a sound that made my heart leap. Water. Not a trickle, not a stream, but a rushing torrent that had to be the falls. We're close, I said, smiling despite the ache in my legs. Dad's face lit up, and even Uncle Daniel allowed himself a grin. Caroline paused at the sound, her shoulders loosening just slightly. We slowed as we neared the crest. The air cooled, damp with mist. The sound grew louder, deeper, until it was all around us. And then, with one last scramble, we broke through the trees and saw it. Bridal Veil Falls thundered before us, cascading down the rock face in a shimmering sheet of white. Spray hit my face, cold and sharp, and I laughed out loud. Dad lifted his arms as though greeting an old friend. We made it. For a moment, the fatigue, the fear, even the memory of that unseen hand, all of it washed away in the roar of water. This was what Henry wanted. This was why we'd come. Dad pulled the metal canister from his backpack, the one holding Henry's ashes. He cradled it in both hands, his expression solemn. All right, old friend, he said softly. Time to send you off right. And then it happened. A sound split the air, so loud and unnatural that it seemed to silence even the waterfall. It was half bleat, half roar, something between a goat and a bear. We all turned toward the ridge above, and there it was, 7 feet tall, hunched but powerful, its fur matted and coarse, legs bent backward like an animal's. In its clawed hand, it held a staff crowned with the severed head of a deer, blood long since dried to black. And its eyes, God, those eyes, they weren't round like ours. They were rectangular, glowing faintly, filled with hate. Caroline's hand went to her pocket, and this time she drew something out, a pistol. Dad shouted. Daniel cursed, and I froze. The creature slammed its staff down on the stone, the sound echoing like thunder. For a moment, I thought I was dreaming, but the spray on my face, the pounding of my heart, and the stench that rolled off the thing, all of it screamed real. The roar of the waterfall seemed to fade into the background as the creature bellowed again, stamping its staff into the rock. The air itself vibrated. Caroline reacted first. She raised the pistol and fired twice. The cracks of the shots echoed off the cliffs, sharp and final. The thing flinched, crouching low, its glowing eyes narrowing. But I didn't see any blood, no wound, nothing to prove the bullets had done a thing. Instead, it let out another hideous roar and slammed its staff down harder. This time the ground shook. Loose stones tumbled down the ridge. My knees buckled, and in that instant I realized the truth. This was what had caused the rock slide earlier. This thing had tried to take my father. Back! Uncle Daniel shouted, shoving Caroline behind him. But she pushed forward, her eyes locked on the creature. Dad's grip tightened on my arm, pulling me away from the edge. Move, son. But I couldn't. Not yet. Because as I looked down, I saw the canister. Henry's ashes. Dad had dropped it when the creature appeared. It lay glinting on the ground between us and the monster. And I knew that was what it wanted. My chest seized with panic. If we left the canister, the creature would take it. Something deep inside me screamed that letting it claim Henry would be wrong. A desecration. The thing bellowed again, louder than the falls. And I ran. Richard! Dad screamed, his voice torn with terror. I dove for the canister, fingers curling around the cold metal. My heart hammered, every instinct begging me to run. But when I looked up, the creature was closer. It had moved without a sound, its eyes burning into me. It roared, raising the staff high above its head. The air around me trembled. I don't know where the strength came from. Maybe it was Henry. Maybe it was God. Maybe it was madness. But I unscrewed the lid, sprinted to the cliff's edge, and hurled the ashes into the waterfall. They burst into a cloud of gray, instantly swallowed by the raging torrent. Henry was gone, returned to the falls. The creature's screamita sounds so furious, so guttural, that it rattled my bones. It lurched forward, its staff slamming down just as the ground shifted beneath my feet. I staggered, teetering on the edge, and then I felt it again. The hand, the same unseen hand that had grabbed me before, yanking me backward, away from the abyss. I hit the dirt hard, lungs burning, as Dad and Uncle Daniel hauled me up. Caroline fired again. 3 rapid shots. Sparks danced against the creature's chest, but still it stood, snarling. Go! Daniel shouted. Now! We bolted, sprinting down the trail as fast as our legs could carry us. The path was steep, treacherous, but adrenaline drove us on. Every time I glanced back, the creature was there, sometimes high on a ridge, its silhouette towering against the sky, sometimes just behind us on the trail, its staff clattering against stone. Once, I saw it crouched in a tree like some monstrous predator, its rectangular eyes glowing in the shadows. Caroline covered our retreat, pistol raised, barking curses under her breath. Dad stayed close to me, his hand gripping my shoulder, as though afraid I'd vanish if he let go. When we finally reached the cabin, I thought the pet might give us shelter, but the sight of it now filled me with dread. The warm porch light, the stocked kitchen, the comforts inside, they all felt false. Like bait. We didn't stop, not even to catch our breath. The sun had dipped alarmingly low. Too low. Somehow hours had passed in the span of minutes. Darkness was coming fast. By the time we reached the ridge where Dad had nearly fallen, the shadows had swallowed the trail. We kept going, hearts pounding, until Caroline suddenly stopped. Wait, she shouted, spinning around. Her face was pale. This isn't right. We're off the trail. I looked around, disoriented. She was right. The trees loomed differently. The ground felt unfamiliar. Dad cursed under his breath. Where the hell did we turn wrong? That's when we heard it. Voices. At first I thought it was our family, the ones we'd left behind at the lower rest stops. But the sound was wrong, garbled, indistinct, like hearing conversation underwater. The words didn't form, just a jumble of tones and pitches. It's them, Daniel said, turning toward the noise. No, Caroline snapped, grabbing his arm, her pistol steady. It isn't. The voices jumped, suddenly coming from the north, then the west, then closer. circling us. Dad pulled me close, his eyes wide with fear. What in God's name is happening? And then, faint but clear, I heard it. The rev of a motorcycle engine. It came from further down the mountain. A sharp, familiar growl of a bike's throttle. My head snapped toward it. Do you hear that? I gasped. Caroline froze. Daniel's mouth fell open. Dad's eyes met mine. And for just a second, there was a sad smile on his face. Henry. Without a word, we ran. Branches clawed at our arms. Rocks cut our palms. But we didn't stop. The engine's sound grew louder, leading us like a beacon through the dark. And then we saw a glow of a campfire flickering ahead. We stumbled into a clearing, half expecting to see Henry himself, astride a bike, grinning like the daredevil he'd always been. Instead, we found my sister, her boyfriend, and another cousin, waiting by the fire, faces drawn with worry. They rushed to us, hugging, crying, asking questions. Relief poured over me, but it was tangled with dread, because just beyond the circle of light, I saw them. Several small cairns of stacked stones stood at the edge of the clearing. I hadn't noticed them before, and behind them, in the deepening dark, glowed two rectangular eyes. They burned with rage. Watching us, I almost cried out, but then I felt a hand on my shoulder. Dad's hand this time, firm and steady. I'm proud of you, he said softly. His voice cracked, but his smile was real. Henry would be, too. I blinked, and when I looked back, the eyes were gone. Excellent. Now we'll finish with part 4, finale, escape and reflection. This closing section will combine both lingering horror and emotional catharsis, ending in a way that feels complete yet leaves viewers unsettled and inviting them to comment about deeper themes like violence and injustice in life. We didn't stay long at the campfire. None of us trusted the safety of that clearing, not with the cairns of stone marking the border like a warning. The rectangular eyes had vanished, but the memory of them burned in me as brightly as the flames. Dad urged everyone to pack up quickly. My sister wanted answers, but he cut her off with a sharpness I'd never heard from him before. Later, we moved now. So we moved. The path down felt both familiar and strange, as though the mountain itself had shifted. At times, I was sure we'd gotten turned around, but somehow we always ended up on the right trail again. Every so often, I thought I heard the faint clatter of hooves on rock, or the low groan of something ancient echoing in the distance. We didn't speak. None of us wanted to draw attention. Only when we reached the first rest station, a one where the others had quit early in the morning, did anyone breathe with relief. The people we'd left behind were still there, wide-eyed as though they'd been waiting far longer than the clock should have allowed. It struck me then, the sun. When we began, it had been morning. When we'd reached the cabin, it was afternoon. By the waterfall, sunset. But as we stepped back onto the lower trail, the sky was just beginning to gray with dawn. A whole night had passed, and yet for us, it had been only hours. Back at the parking lot, we loaded into our cars in silence. Nobody mentioned the creature. Nobody asked about the eyes. Not one of us dared speak Henry's name. And yet, I felt him. When I closed my eyes, I heard the rev of that motorcycle, guiding us down the mountain. I remembered the unseen hand grabbing my belt. Twice, saving my life. I remembered Dad's smile in the firelight, saying Henry would be proud. Henry was gone, but not gone. He had kept his promise to never stop living boldly. Even in death, he had taken us on one final adventure, one more dangerous, more terrifying than any of us could have imagined. It's been years since that climb, but the memory won't let go. Sometimes I dream of the waterfall. I wake up with the sound of hooves echoing in my ears, or the sight of those rectangular eyes burning in the dark. Was it a guardian of the mountain? A curse tied to the falls? Or something older, darker, feeding on grief and fear? I don't know. What I do know is this. Henry's ashes are part of that waterfall now. He belongs to it. And whatever lives on that mountain knows it. I've never gone back. None of us have. We don't talk about it at reunions. If someone brings it up, the room goes quiet. But sometimes, late at night, when traffic is light and the world is hushed, I hear it again, the low growl of a motorcycle engine, fading into the distance. And I wonder if Henry is still out there, watching over us, or warning us never to return. This story is about more than just a cursed trail or a monster in the woods. It's about how easily life can be stolen by an accident, by violence, by forces we don't understand. It's about how fragile we are, and how often we take the people we love for granted. Henry lived boldly. He faced tragedy without bitterness. And in the end, he reminded us that family, loyalty, and courage matter more than fear. But the violence of that mountain, the injustice of a world where good men are taken too soon, it still lingers. And maybe that's the real curse, knowing how thin the line is between safety and loss. Do you think what we faced was something supernatural, a guardian spirit of the mountaineer, just the madness of exhaustion and fear? And more importantly, how do you see the role of violence and injustice in our lives? Should we fight it head on, like Caroline did with her gun? Or resist it quietly, with faith and memory, like my father holding on to Henry's ashes? Share your thoughts in the comments. Tell me your stance. Because stories like this aren't just meant to be hard theory, meant to be wrestled with.